Listen video. None. Y'all can hear me pretty well. And I think you should be able to hear that music.
You want to be able to control audio levels?
No, I think it's fine. Hey, Caro, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Didn't get a feedback on him. Hey, testing. Caro, can you speak to me? Speak to me, baby.
Oh, dude.
What?
I knew you.
Okay, I got you loud and clear. Can you hear my
Wait, no, I
my
can't
sultry
hear
music? You can hear me, or you cannot hear me?
The sultry music is cutting in and out.
Okay, I can hear you now.
But the music is cutting in and out, right, Bond? It's like really bad quality.
Correct. Cutting
It's
in and
like
out.
shit.
It's like you're playing with the turntables.
It might have something to do with the way in which Discord does.
Because that's what happens on particular websites like Twitch and Facebook.
Yeah.
It just removes copyrighted music. So if you played a song that wasn't copyrighted, we might get a different thing.
Okay, let's try that. Let's try. Something.
Still cutting in and out. You might have noise suppression turned on.
Yeah, that's what I'm looking at.
Now it goes. There we go.
It says something in Discord as well. It says random.
So there's a bit of noise suppression, is that right, Bond? Keep on giving me testing here, so I know what it sounds like.
It's playing better, but it's still cutting in and out.
Anytime it picks up music, their channel.
It's only getting worse and worse. I'm gonna saying just use Fredboat to play the music. Not sure what Fredboat is, but thank you for the fix.
Hey, everyone. We're gonna try.
Go through Twitter, right?
Yeah, we're gonna do that now. You guys got me loud and clear?
Loud and clear.
Beautiful. We're gonna try the Twitter Spaces. Okay, hey Bond, maybe you can switch over to the Twitter Spaces and help me test that.
Through OpenTensor or seems
I
like
know, just through
you are live.
through your own. Yeah. Through the mic. So, hey Bond, can you hear me on the Twitter Spaces?
There is a delay, but I can hear you.
Great. Now I'm going to bring you up on the stage and we're going to see if we can get you speaking both ways. Yeah. If this doesn't work, we can always just go back to the previous thing we've always done. So you're up there on stage there, Bond.
I am indeed. There's just like a little delay, but I think we can manage it.
We can manage it. But why don't you speak on the Twitter Spaces and see if it comes through?
Are you Bluetooth to this still?
Do you hear me loud and clear?
So I can hear you now, but can the people in Discord hear Bond through mine?
I think they can because I can hear myself talk.
Okay, great. Boom, just like that. This is fantastic. There's a lot of cords and cables this way and that. I mean, we might as well give the music a go.
You mother always talking about you said this the situation was on the board. Still feeling okay. Pretty good.
Hey, Bond, I'm going to ask you to please, moderators on the Discord, if you can just mute anybody who's not muted as a rule of thumb. So if you don't want to be muted, don't unmute yourself.
Hi, I'm quite allergic to you.
Hey, Emozilla, can I get you on the Twitter side?
Yeah,
Same with
I can join that.
A number of Zen academies like offering
Great.
people to use their VA virtual assistant services for like specifically Web3. So they say it's $1,000 to like
Hello, hello, everyone. We're going to start just in a second here. If I could get Technium to come to the Twitter side of the Spaces. We're going to do mostly from Twitter and then bridge it over via my microphone. Okay. All right. So we have Technium and eMozilla on the Twitter Spaces. We're waiting for Technium to get up on the stage here. We have Bond on the stage. We have everyone nicely put to bed and muted, except for Bond in the Discord. This is exciting, guys. Is
Yeah,
my voice coming through?
it is coming through.
Fantastic. Now, okay, we got Technium up on the stage. We're just gonna make sure that it's going both ways. Bond, Technium in the Twitter Spaces. Can you hear Bond from the Discord Spaces?
I'm pretty sure he can.
Did you hear that, Technium? Okay, good. All right. Technium, if you could unmute yourself on the Twitter Spaces and join the call. Same with you, eMozilla.
Yo.
Yo. Okay, great. That's coming through. Everyone heard eMozilla on the left side. We got Technium here. The current audio setup is as technologically innovative as Bittensor itself. I think next time we're going to try Twitch as well. We'll try Twitch, Discord, and Twitter Spaces. We're going to apply the principle of nom nom everywhere we go. Very cool. So the idea for this TGIFT is...
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we got you. We got you, Emma. Okay, fantastic. So the idea for this Twitter Spaces is just to talk about the NousResearch subnet, the pre-training subnet, a variety of other subnets that are being built on Bittensor and how they interconnect, specifically about pre-training, fine-tuning, and building open source language models. I think it's something that Bittensor has been trying to do for a very long time, and it wasn't really possible until Revolution, until the first iteration of this, which was the pre-training subnet. Rustic is not on the line, but that subnet, which is subnet 9, showcased the pre-training of a GPT-2 model. It's moving up to a billion parameter model pretty soon. We're sort of moving along to larger and larger models, seeing what we can really juice out of these subnets. But the one we're talking about right today is from eMozilla and Technium, NousResearch. Really excited to have them on stage, and I'll pass you guys the mic. Emo, tell us about the fine-tuning subnet by News.
Hey there.
Hey.
Hey there, everyone. My name is Jeffrey Cannell, also known as eMozilla. Really glad to be here and talk to you about what was like an awesome piece of technology to like get to learn and work with. And that was the creation of Subnet 6. It was also really cool to get the ID 6 and that it had happened to be open when we went to register. It was cool too. Yeah, so I'll give everyone just like a really quick background on kind of who NousResearch is, like what we do, and then talk through sort of the path that led us here. So NousResearch is really like a lot of us. We all started out as I like to say we were just homies on the Discord. We were just a Discord community of people doing AI research, kind of just like on our own. So it was a lot of just the different people who were hacking away at this, that, and the other thing, whatever interests them. and there was this Discord put together of like, you know, a lot of really high signal people who were working on cool stuff, and we were just sharing ideas and talking. And you know, central to that were some of the people like Technium, who kind of, you know, not to put them up on too big of a stage, but it feels like a lot of the open source AI world kind of revolves around him. And so when he messaged me and was like, "Hey, I like what you're working on. Like, come check out this Discord." I was like, "Oh, you know, a little bit starstruck or whatever." But yeah, so I joined, and over the past several months, we've been working on a variety of open source AI projects that, you know, we're most known for the NousResearch model, which is probably, like, by consensus, I would say one of the most used open source AI models. We've ported it over to a variety of, you know, like the latest architecture, starting with Llama 2, Mistral, and our recent Mixtral release. You know, really for the first time, we sat down and said, like, wow, we might have like actually, like, you know, beat GPT 3.5 here. And so it was very, like, it was an exciting experience for us. It's what we're probably most known for. But really, we're also an open source group that's doing research in other areas as well. We released a paper that just got accepted to ICLR called Yarn, which was a state-of-the-art method for extending the context length of large language models, so allowing them to go past like the normal 2,000, 4,000 tokens that you see, but going to like essentially arbitrarily limitless amount of tokens. And the key innovation there was that, like, it didn't take a lot of extra training to do that. So we're able to look that there were some methods we discovered that, you know, enabled that. And as a part of that, you know, we made sure when we went through the process of it, like, everything was open source. We all of our data sets, like everything we did to build that, you know, we built out in the open. And that's sort of like just the spirit of Nous. You know, our ultimate North Star is to create like perpetual self-improving AI. And what we do to get to that is to just knock down every little step of the way to get there, you know, dealing with whatever it is. So that's kind of who we are as like a bigger organization. Ryan, or Tech, I'm sorry, I don't know if there's anything you want to like add to that.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, there's not too much to add to it, but we also work on a lot of data sets and data set synthesis pipelines. So that's kind of where we met Cole, who does Subnet 18, and that kind of started this whole project with Bittensor.
So yeah, so when we sat down and like thought about you know, our goal of how can we create the best open source language model, you know, really what we found was there are a lot of people, you know, trying to get high scores on benchmarks, right? And for better or worse, like the Hugging Face open LLM leaderboard sort of became this, like, you know, it's the place where you could strut your stuff, and if you could get the highest scores on there, you know, you get clout as being the you know, getting the #1 spot, to the point that, like, you know, people are putting in like their VC pitch decks that like, we made the top model spot, or you know, something like that. So like, when, you know, the problem with that, of course, is that there's some phrase, I forget exactly how it goes, but it's something along the lines of like, when like an evaluation becomes a target, it seeks, you know, ceases to be a good evaluation. And so, you know, as we were going down this, we're trying to figure out like, what's a way we can properly incentivize actually not the creation of the best, you know, scoring highest on a few benchmarks, which is, you know, very gameable, to like actually incentivizing the thing that we want, which is the creation of the best open source models. And that, you know, that's when really kind of like the idea for what became Subnet 6 like came into focus. And when we took a look over at Subnet 9, which is the pre-training subnet, there was a lot of great technical work that had already been done that set the foundation for how, like, on a subnet, models could be trained, shared, updated, all of that. So it was really, like, I mean, invaluable to have that as like a base to work from. And then, so we saw that and we're like, okay, that's really awesome. And then we looked over and we saw Subnet 18. And what do we see on Subnet 18? We see an incentive structure to facilitate the creation of like lots and lots and lots of new synthetic data. And that's awesome. And what do you, yeah.
Pardon me. I think that's somebody speaking in the Discord. Don't mind them. Just keep on going. Emo.
Yeah, so there was this 18 where we have this synthetic data pipeline that's putting out all this brand new data out of GPT-4, and we realized basically that although we all would like a model that's better than GPT-4, if we made a model that was an open source model that was as good as GPT-4, that's a good first step sort of on the path of propagating the creation of continual open source AI. But the problem, of course, is that synthing a lot of GPT-4 data, traditionally, is very expensive. And the people who would do that would be doing it essentially out of charity, right? Like if you were trying to make your own data set to train it and do that, you would be paying all these synth costs to do that. But with Subnet 18, we created an incentive structure already exists to do this data synthesis. So based on the evaluation metric that was first pioneered over on Subnet 9, which is just taking models and evaluating them, their loss on some subset of the data set, the difference with Subnet 6, and which makes it really interesting, is that we said, well, what if we only evaluated the models on the brand new data that's coming out of Subnet 18? So Subnet 18 is constantly creating new data that is GPT-4 answering, novel questions about all these different things. So the way the data synth pipeline works is there's all these different concepts. It uses a couple of different methods from different papers to continually generate new prompts that are going to, cause the model to GPT-4, that is, to synthesize and create some reasoning answers from some reasoning. And so by taking the latest data from that subnet, only the latest data, the stuff that was, gen in the last 15 minutes, in the last 20 minutes, we use that actually as the evaluation metric to say which of these models that are being trained is the best, with the idea that will get where we want to measure how close is our model to GPT-4, basically. And because we have an incentive structure to constantly create new data over on Subnet 18, we have the luxury of finally breaking free from what has been the norm in the space already, or up to now, which is the ability to train on the benchmark or to overfit to just the subset of things that the subset of questions that are within the benchmarks on, say, the Hugging Face leaderboard. Because you have this constantly newly generated unseen test data, the only way to actually score better on the model is to actually make a model that is as close to outputting. You don't know what GPT-4 is going to say. So you have to actually train a model to be GPT-4, which again is the goal altogether. So you can see how all of the incentive structures within the various subnets can be tied together to actually incentivize and align everyone to be, to have all their arrows pointing in the same direction. And that direction is creating the best open source language model.
Amazing, Emo. Thank you so much.
Wow.
There's a lot in there. I think that what's very interesting about this particular subnet is, okay, from one side, we have the first continuously generating data set benchmark. There's no benchmark that's just continuously improving and getting better. Because we're using this continuous data from Subnet 18, the models are being evaluated on something that's new every 15 minutes, as you said. And because of that, you can't cheat. You can't leak the data set into, you can't train on MLU and then tell people that you did really well on MLU, but in fact the data set has leaked because it's all being created right on the fly. I think that's really fascinating, and I'm curious about because I think you guys know this more than me. How much cheating do people think is happening in the standard benchmarking world right now?
Ryan, you want to talk a little bit about what we found?
Yeah, I don't want to name a lot of names, but pretty much I wouldn't say all of the top models on the leaderboard right now, but a huge chunk of the top models on there have been accused of, at least, of cheating on a variety of different benchmarks. Like, I don't want to say that all the models that are on the top are, but there are definitely a lot of contamination issues in a lot of the models out there right now. And a huge portion of the like open source community just doesn't even trust the leaderboard anymore. Like, nobody even really seems to want to test out the latest model that hits the top spots or is somewhere up there on the top, because they just have very little faith that it will actually mean anything. Yeah, and so a lot of people have turned to like the chatbot arenas leaderboard, but the problem with theirs is that it takes often weeks to get onto that leaderboard, and they only like select from a few of the new models that come out to put on that leaderboard, so you don't really get a very good breadth of models that are getting tested on there. Like, there's very likely better models than a lot of the ones that are tested on there right now, but because they didn't already like beat some benchmark that was already out there or have like made some name for themselves in some way, they aren't even like considered to get added to that leaderboard. So it's a better leaderboard there, but it's also got a lot of limitations that can't really be addressed very easily.
And an interesting piece about cheating is like not all of it actually is intentional. So I'll give you an example. We suspect that on accident, some of the GMS 8K data is actually like baked into the Mistral 7B base model. And so because of that, like any model that trained on that, like, any fine tune of that, like downstream of it is like itself contaminated. And this problem, in fact, is only going to get with like fixed training data sets. This is like with the advent of language models now and like training, like there's going to be like this point in time where like there's like the before times, right? Like before language models existed, right? And like almost all text has like high provenance of being like, written by like a human, right? And so the after times and like, and in the after times, like nearly all text is like unlikely to have been generated by humans, right? And so because like we're already starting to exist in the after times, like a lot of training, even base models have been like subtly contaminated by the training sets together. And then even not just in the base models, there are a lot of training data sets that have been like evolved from the test data sets. So like what I mean by that is like it doesn't contain any of the original like questions that are in the benchmark stuff, but it is a test set that has been like that is asking questions in the same way that like the test set does, and so and you might not have even known that if you just go on Hugging Face and download the data set. You're like, oh, this looks like a really good data set of like trains, and like it doesn't even and like if you do a contamination comparison where you just are looking for like LMEval harness has, which you can like look for substrings and like, does it look like this? Oh, it's not contaminated. None of the questions in this are in this, so like it's not contamination. When in really it's like a reformulation of the questions and stuff like that. So even it's all is a mixture of all of that, but it basically comes down to that like fixed evaluation metrics like essentially will not get us to where we want to go, and that's why like this Subnet 6, which is really like I said, like the first continual evaluation mechanism that's quantitative at least is a really cool thing, because then you can actually go back and revalidate that. So all the data we used exists within like from Subnet 18. So it was fresh at the time that we evaled against it, but now it actually becomes part of a training set that can be used to make the model better. And I don't care if you train on what was the test data, because the next test is going to be brand new and you can't see it. So the test data, what was like the evaluation data we're using becomes the training data to help make the model better, to get it closer and closer to GPT-4.
We're in the future times. We're in the future times when synthetic data is where everyone's going to learn. I think that, I think I heard that GPT-4 was trained primarily on synthetic data. And it makes sense, right? Like why should we use all of this very low density data to train language models when we can get extremely valuable text outputs from the models themselves. So like, I think there's an aspect to that too. It's like perhaps, you know, data sets become just generators in the future rather than being static things. This is actually, you know, a standard going forward for the way in which benchmarks will exist. But also more than that, I mean, I think there's also this aspect to the first incentivized version of a benchmark, and in how, like, there's a lot of people out there, really brilliant engineers, machine learning researchers, et cetera, that are unable to monetize their work directly. And have you seen some interest from the news people, just in your overall community, that want to come and see if they can monetize their work this way?
Yeah, I mean, it's the response honestly has been, frankly, like, as you know, even 10 times better than we ever really could have hoped. And because it is aligning people in like the correct direction, right? It's saying, hey, we want the best open source language model. You have the ability to create it, rather than asking you to do that, you know, out of charity. You can both do the work you love, and be, you know, correctly compensated for it. And you know that system where people are correctly incentivized to achieve the outcome that you desire, like those are like really the only stable systems that ever actually exist, right? Like any system that isn't in its stable state at that ultimately like will like crash and burn. But when you have that as your state, as your steady state, you know, you get good things out of it. So we've had amazing success. And to speak to that, when we look at the leaderboard you have, I don't even know who a lot of the people who had submitted and won, you know, really like significant amounts of money, if we're being honest here. I don't even know who they are. And that fits very much into like the larger idea of a meritocracy, decentralized AI. You know, like what is truly decentralized, or if you look at a larger picture of like the value proposition that like that crypto offers, which is, you know, disintermediated, permissionless, you know, transfers of value. That is something that like this, you know, fully embodies, because like Tech was saying earlier, the chatbot arena, the chat arena is great, but like it fundamentally has to be, because it is a qualitative measure, you know, sort of like gate capped, or like there's all these things that like you can't just get in by you know, like some crypto anon can't just like, you know, come in and play. And whereas with the Subnet 6, like anyone can submit a model and it's judged solely on, you know, the merits that we have established, which is its, you know, likelihood of representing GPT-4. And as such, you know, can go from, you know, 0 to, you know, significant revenue streams purely by doing the thing they want without having to give up even anonymity if they don't want it.
But the only thing they do have to give up is the fact that the model goes into the open source. And I think that's something really cool about this. We've monetized open source machine learning models. We dropped a monetization layer in to something that was maybe asking for it but didn't know where it was. And then now there's a whole bunch of people out there that were doing this for free that now can get paid. And I think that's fantastic, you know, when it comes to accelerating the field. And you know, this idea was cooked up actually because I was speaking to one of I think it was the CFO of NousResearch in Austin, and we were talking about how there's a lot of idealism in the open source machine learning world around like we need to ensure that this technology is out there and anybody can access it. But if we don't have some form of monetization, if we don't have an incentive layer somewhere, it's very difficult to compete with a corporation. And we have this trajectory for most open source AI companies. They start off being open and singing the praises of openness. OpenAI is a perfect example, but then eventually they sort of hit a roadblock because monetization wasn't built in from the first place. And if they want to go to the next level, if they really want to train that 100 billion parameter model, they're going to need to get paid to do it, and they're going to need to constrain the model in some way. They're going to need to hold it back, withhold it from people. But I think that what we're trying to do here, you know, especially with your subnet, is if we can start with the incentivization ingrained directly through the engineers and the benchmarks, then we can force these models to be out in the open and usable by a large number of people without being closed off. So
Yeah, it is an important point because the way that like from it to technical, and you bake that into the technical piece, right? So like the way the model actually gets evaluated is it needs to be a public model that's on Hugging Face, because like the validators have no, there's no shared secrets between the submitter and the validators. So the validators have to be able to like physically go download the model and get all the weights and inference it themselves. And then like the corollary to that is if the validators are able to do it, then like so is the rest of the world.
Very cool. Before I pass the mic to Bond here, Technium, Emo, what are you guys thinking of doing going forward? Like, what's the plan for the subnet in the next the month? Q1, Q2, Q3.
Short term, we have a little bit of technical housekeeping to take through. We had, a very substantial response would be the way I would use to describe it, and participation. And so we are doing some technical work to like make sure that everything goes smoothly with that. But after that, we're really going to turn our focus to the data generation side, and Tech can talk a little bit about some of our plans of what we're going to do with that.
Yeah, like I think right now the biggest challenge is that we're using this evil instruct method, which Wizard LM wrote a paper on how to generate like diverse data and consistently do that. And right now it's generating, I wouldn't say like the full breadth of what GPT-4 is capable of generating. And so over time and over iterations, my role will be to keep expanding out what the Subnet 18's data synthesis pipeline spits out so that models can, every iteration, get closer and closer to an actually true representation of GPT-4. Right now, it's good, but there's a lot of diversity that needs to be added. Like right now, the pipeline does not generate any like code instructions, for instance, and obviously, if you're going to match GPT-4, you're going to need to be good at generating code and things like that. So over time and every iteration, it'll get more and more diverse and more representative of like both what users actually want an LLM to do, as well as like what GPT-4's actual capabilities at its best are.
Amazing. So I actually have a more of a layman's question here. We talk about GTP as the GTP4 as the gold standard, and benchmarks aside, what do you think makes GPT-4 so great that people want to use that as a benchmark? And then the second question would be, when do you think the open source community will surpass GPT-4? Either one of you.
Ryan, I think you're best to talk about why GPT-4 is so great. I've actually I've actually never used GPT-4 once in my life. So I have kept that streak long enough that like I just can't do it now. But yeah, so Ryan can talk about it.
I think the main reason is that it's just better than any other model that I've tried at reasoning, at coding, at accuracy in every task. It's just better at following instructions. It's pretty much been better at almost every task than all the other models, except for things that it refuses to do. Obviously, it's like a score of 0 on the things and tasks that it refuses to do. And so something that we're going to try and incorporate is something so that it basically, with our synthetic pipeline or our test, like the validators, is going to just like ignore any of the refusals that GPT generates and not test it to ensure that these models are learning all the same refusals that it does. But other than that, I think it's pretty hard to say that there's any other model out there that is as accurate as often on almost any task than GPT-4. It's very easy though for us to swap out GPT-4 for, I don't know, like if Gemini Ultra came out with an API or whatever and was significantly better or on average better or better at certain tasks, like we can parse that out so that, like, let's say Gemini Ultra is better at coding than GPT-4, then we can have our code generation pipeline generating from Gemini Ultra, or whatever we can determine is better than GPT-4. We can generate whatever it needs to be from any of these other models. But inherently, the system will, at best, generate models that are just a little bit not too substantially better than whatever model we're distilling from. Like, it is possible that if we only generate some subset of what GPT-4 is capable of doing that is better than the average of what GPT-4 is doing, that you could train a model from that is better than GPT-4. But where that like actual limit lies is not exactly clear, because nobody's actually trained a model that is as good or better than GPT-4 yet. But in terms of like how we determine that, I think a lot of it still rests on those traditional benchmarks and trusting that the people that are using it find it more useful than other models. Maybe I missed part of your question, but does that answer most of it?
Yes.
As far as
indeed.
when we would potentially see the open source, like there be an open source competitor to GPT-4, I would say that, you know, if you asked me that question last year, I would have been talking to you about like, let's get to GPT 3.5. I can say with pretty good like certainty now that probably the best open source models that we have are like our peers to GPT 3.5. So, you know, and that is the original Chat GPT, you know, that like came out and wowed the world, which was like, you know, maybe a year, 16 months ago, maybe, if you can believe that, right? And so, and at the time, the open source world, it was the gap between where we were to GPT 3.5 was, you know, huge. And we've just steadily, linearly sort of, I mean, I don't want to say linearly because that sounds like a bad word when we're dealing with what's happening in the AI world, but like we've just crawled towards getting closer. And I feel like today we can look at each other and say that like the open source world has at least replicated or gotten up to, if not past, GPT 3.5. So GPT-4 is like, you know, it's the next boss in the Pokemon, you know, in the Pokemon gym that we need to take on. And like us at Noose and all the other open source, you know, orgs are just going to do what it takes.
Amazing. And
Also,
in terms
something
of
else that I would, sorry,
Go
something
ahead.
else that I would add to the getting past GPT-4 level. A lot of that can also be done from pre-training, like the other subnet that does the pre-training. Like you could potentially have this data set that is being generated and train it over these base models that the other subnet is trying to create to just automatically have it generalize better than the models that we have now by training on this data, and then it just de facto becoming better than GPT-4 if you create a base model that's just been trained on much better data or much more data than GPT-4 has. It's probably a long way away because I know that subnet is still working with pretty small models, like 1 billion parameters or so. So I don't know that you could pre-train it with enough tokens at 1 billion parameters to beat GPT-4, but I think there's a lot of potential in that subnet in pre-training something at a bigger scale that just beats the base model that GPT-4 is, and then training it on the same data will result in an automatically better model.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of things that need to come into play in order for us to beat OpenAI. And I think that we have the firepower and we have the mechanisms, but we just need to make them click. This one is very good at picking out the best fine-tuned model and finding the people that can fine-tune it better and better. And the same thing for the pre-training subnet. I'm really interested in mechanisms like the HiveMind subnet on Bittensor, which are going and taking you know, they're taking fire at the more difficult problem of how can you combine the computation of a variety of participants and pay them for, say, contributing an H100 pod, but even better, like contributing, paying them for contributing gradients and improving the loss. You know, if we can build incentivization mechanisms where we're training together models of the same size, I think that's really fascinating because now we can we can take them and put them into these subnets, for instance. But it's where we'll be able to get these extremely large models that are fine-tuned pre-trained, and then we can fine-tune them to perform even better than, say, what the Mistral release or the 70 billions Falcons, et cetera, can do.
Yeah, that's
think that-
sort of the goal at the end. If you think about all like the latent compute and the latent ability that exists through every person out there, it's much larger than any single organization can accumulate. Whether it's OpenAI or whomever. And so, insofar as the incentive structures will allow for all of those, all those pieces of the compute, the mind power, all of that to be correctly aligned towards that end goal, then that's where it'll happen.
Yeah, and I think if you look at how quickly the open source community has gotten to GPT 3.5 through means that were a lot less wasteful than OpenAI, just out of constraint. They didn't have that much money, so they're like, well, we're going to take advantage of a lot of synthetic data. And if you think about that from an incentive perspective, it's like maximize the response performance of a small language model. Well, how do you do that? You do that with synthetic data. In a sense, there has been an incentive mechanism for all these engineers to perform this well and get to 3.5 in a year and 6 months. I think that if we can find those, pinpoint the exact things that people can optimize and build mechanisms like we've done with new subnet on subnet 6, if we can find and pinpoint the right things to optimize, maybe it's generating synthetic data, like that's a precursor. We're doing that, maybe it's figuring out how to properly fine tune. Well, we're doing that now. Okay, maybe it's about producing gradients, maybe it's about producing pre-trained models. If we could find the specific, like imagine us like Luke Skywalker, looking for the Death Star portal to blow it up. Like we need to find these points and then apply pressure. And if we can do that, I think that we'll be able to not just beat GPT-4, but blow it out of the water.
Yeah, and when you spoke about the constraints, it's always been said that like necessity is the mother of invention. In the reason a lot of this has been brought down to the scale that a few people in a Discord can like make a meaningful contribution is because of those constraints. When you don't have access to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of GPUs, you have to find a way to make what you do have access to work. And then, that constraint placed on you by your environment, necessitates you to make an innovative solution. And what's great about these innovative solutions in the AI space is like, if you make, because of your constraint, you're doing everything you can to like make it fit on like my one GPU, and you make, quantization methods or other, you make advancements, or like we did with Yarn, like to make it so that it can be scaled down better. Like you can do more with less, you can do more with less. And then if you actually take that method and have more, then you can see even more explosion from that. So the constraints that we face within the open source world have been very high to force us to be as innovative as we have to be.
So we only have 15 minutes left on the call because the news guys need to get out of here on the dot. But perhaps there's some more questions from the Discord or from Twitter just about what we're doing here on Subnet 6, about Bittensor in general. Let us know. Or Vaughn,
Seems like everyone has been really, really engaged with the conversation because there haven't been much talk in the Discord or Twitter or Telegram. So everyone's hyped about what you guys are doing and what you're talking about. Can you briefly explain for the layman the difference between synthetic data and non-synthetic data, and why one is better than the other?
Inherently, one isn't necessarily better than the other. It's just there was an attempt to crowdsource like instruction chat data called Open Assistant about, I don't know, maybe a year ago, maybe 9 months ago or so. And when you train on the model, it did not perform very well. it obviously degraded the benchmarks, and this was kind of before the benchmarks were being gamed and everything. But it also was just nobody really thought that this was like anywhere near close to like GPT 3.5 or GPT 4 level at the time. And then this alpaca paper came out where they used, I think, 3.5 turbo to do this method that they created to generate instruction and response pairs. And training on that started to show like pretty impressive gains. But the real difference, though, is that it's really easy to get the kind of data that you need to train on, whereas with human generated data, unless you have like a system. Sorry, I'm echoing. But with human generated data, often you go like scrape some website and then you have to somehow fit that into a consistent format and scenario where it's like, you know, in the case of ChatGPT like models, like a chat scenario where there's an instruction and then it responds with that data. And it's really hard to get both like consistency out of like just randomly scraping websites and trying to put that into something to train, and the quality like minimum from all of that data. So like you could theoretically get the same kind of GPT-4 like model with just human data. Like I'm pretty sure OpenAI did a lot of that, but the cleaning and the filtering and the quality checking and the putting it in the right format and everything, like for the instruction tuning part of it, like the pre-training, you do like this raw text stuff. But for the instruction tuning and the chat tuning, like OpenAI had to pay likely Scale AI and some other companies like that tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars for them to have expert people, like experts in all these different domains and different things like that, to create these instructions to be high enough quality to actually teach the model to do like these tasks with accuracy. And if you just go onto some like forum where they're like role playing, for instance, and you want to train the model to do role playing, then you're going to have both like really inconsistent styles and stuff like that. But you're also going to have like very different levels of quality, and it's pretty difficult to like determine that quality like manually. Like if you'd have to have a human go through and like read each one and like score each one manually. Probably want to have dozens of humans doing that for all of the data to like actually pull out the quality from that. So what you can do with synthetic data is, especially with like GPT-4, you can at least ensure the quality, but you can also ensure like the formatting and the style and all of that. Like you have so much more control over the actual data that's being generated so that you can have like the actual end result in the model that you want. But in the end, you still need like to keep taking it further and further. You do need to still have like some human data in the mix, some new data at least. It doesn't necessarily have to be like human written, but you have to have some new data from some source for it to like learn new things, because it can't just like, if it never learned that Bill Clinton was the president in the 90s, then just generating synthetic data around that is probably not going to get you that knowledge, at least in an easy way. Like you could potentially say it, but it won't, like you'll have to verify it yourself and all that. So there's always probably going to be a need for like data from outside sources as well. But using LLMs with in a synthetic sense, you can pull in like outside data and have it transform that into something that's much more consistent and higher quality too. So yeah, that's mainly the main difference between synthetic and human quality. Like you can get very high quality human data, but you just have to pay a ton of money. And if you don't pay, then it's going to be really inconsistent or very different quality between each sample.
That brings me to a different question. Do you feel that OpenAI's advantage really has been monetary, or has it also been on the technology side? Obviously, a little bit goes with, it's correlated, but with Bittensor's incentive layer, where we could potentially get to the monetary side. So where do you think their advantage lies?
As somebody who primarily works with data and data sets for training models, like I think data is paramount. Obviously though, OpenAI has other tricks up their sleeve, like they did really good work on RLHF, which for a long time the open source community didn't even touch until DPO came out. Like it might have only been like a month ago. And they have plenty of other tricks out there too that they've not really shared, I'm sure. But the crux of like any LLM or any of these AI models is the data. There's architectural changes that can be big, but a lot of them are like very small improvements compared to having higher quality or more diverse or just more data in general. And so that's like the make or break for any AI company or any AI model is the quality and diversity and scale of their data. And OpenAI definitely had the advantage of going to scale with lots of money to have incredibly high quality data for their instruct tuning and stuff like that.
Exactly.
Yeah, makes sense.
And from a technological standpoint, I mean, it is likely that they are, several years ahead from, things that are being introduced now into like the academic space. So we know GPT-4 was trained on synthetic data, which means we know GPT-4 was like finished training more than a year and a half ago. So like, which means it must have been generating synthetic data like 2, so I mean, like you can just sort of see how like what the realizations that the open scientific community has come to, like we just lag behind a little bit. And there's a lot of speculation that GPT-4 is a mixture of experts model. And yes, mixture of experts from an academic perspective had been known of, but it sort of had been known of and sat on a shelf. And like, we didn't know that amongst all the other 20 million different ideas people have had, that like, oh, that's really the one, right? And like a lot of it is some of that too. It's like there's a lot of different academic things that people have proposed. And you really need to have, and they do have, like the brilliant scientists on staff who can like distill all that and like point them towards this is the thing we need to use and point our, put our efforts into.
That actually brings me up to a next question is, being that you've registered a subnet, seeing that there's 32 subnets, what is something that you would like to see on Bittensor in the future that has not been done yet or has not been brought to Bittensor?
Atomic cross subnet interactions would be cool. So right now we're using the data as a cross, but we can't like, it doesn't happen all quote unquote like on chain. So facilitating a true interaction mechanism would be interesting from like a technical perspective. Something as someone who like is working on the code, that's something I think would be really exciting. And we just didn't, you needed that. Now that we see that we've sort of unlocked the recipe of subnets working together, sort of perhaps enshrining that within like the technological layer would be really cool.
Totally agree.
And I believe that's happening on subnet 1. So we're working towards that.
Yeah, because I think like Technium's synthetic data generation needs to be pushed to subnet 18, and then the data from there gets generated and put on weights and biases, and the weights and biases. There's a middleman, and that middleman is this weights and biases, which is fantastic in its own way, but kind of annoying. It would be much better if instead the validators could just have access bandwidth to subnet 18 and then generate synthetic data on the fly, and it would just be a push to that repository rather than needing to change up to. I think that's where we are right now. There's a lot of work that I think Technium's doing to improve the synthetic data generation, and I'm really curious. Actually, that's my last question for Technium. Like, how can we push the synthetic data generation to be totally best in class, to cover, all of the different problems and tasks that we could imagine needing to be running on?
Yeah, I think it's in any scenario going to be like an iterative thing. There's a lot of tasks that are like low hanging fruit that are easy to cover, that are, classified already. Like, for instance, like in LMSys's Chatbot Arena paper, they classify like all the use cases that people have compared models against and stuff like that. So there's a lot of things that are like pretty low hanging fruit to target as additional things to diversify the data set and stuff like that. But longer term, you kind of just have to see where the weaknesses are in what gets generated from it and add those one at a time. Maybe not one at a time, but and as you discover them. Which has been a lot of what I've been doing over the last year is like I'll make Hermes 1 came out and then people will tell me it's not great at this, or have you thought about making it good at doing that? That kind of thing. And then you just add that to the pipeline one step at a time.
Ultimately, if the synthetic data generation pipeline is good enough, you don't even need to pre-train because you have every single piece of information in your synthetic data set.
Yeah, like Phi 2 or maybe Phi 1.5 or whatever was one of the first models to do a pre-training on exclusively distilled data from GPT-4. I do have some issues with their model, whereas I think that they also had the same problem of not getting the data to be as diverse as GPT-4 could have made. Like it seems like it's pretty good at like academic tasks and things like that, but then like if you go into like fiction writing or something like that, it falters pretty easily. And so that's why this always expanding coverage is really important, because like, yeah, you'll get really good at some tasks, but not all tasks. And so just continually expanding the tasks that covers is really important to like have a good approximation of GPT-4, because it can do a lot more tasks than people have currently distilled it on, or that the dataset pipelines right now are generating around.
And I think that
But eventually we'll have trillion, 2 trillion, 10 trillion token data sets that are all synthetic, and you could pre-train some of the best models in the world with that.
potentially coming from our side, I think maybe we will soon have the largest synthetic data set. Maybe having seen what we've produced in the last little while. Technium, are we en route to having that?
Yeah, like I think the previous one would have been probably OpenOrca. At least if we're talking about synthetic data distilled from like a very high level model, OpenOrca probably had the last biggest, which was about 1 million examples. Well, I guess it had in total 5 million 3.5 turbo examples and 1 million GPT-4 examples. And now I think Subnet 18 has generated potentially as many as like 7 million GPT-4 only examples. So yeah, I do think there is now the biggest
Seven
synthetic
times
data set that's for GPT-4 exclusively. Yeah.
So I think it's very possible that we could train, in this modality, we could train the best fine-tuned language model in the open source community that's ever been made.
Potentially. The only thing is that you can scale the data, but if it's all like a single task, or like a scope that's not wide, then it still won't learn how to do certain things. Like for instance, like function calling, you won't learn that from the data that we're generating right now, even if you train on 6 million examples of the data that we generate right now. So the diversity is almost as important as the scale.
Right. And then we'll have to be very careful about the sizes of each of those problem sets inside of the overall data set itself. So there's like a lot.
It's like a ratio problem.
Yeah, it's a ratio problem. Okay, so we only have.
And obviously, though, the actual generating that we do, like even if that ratio is off, the data set that gets created afterwards, people can cluster that data set, or they can curate that data set in any way they want to, like readjust the ratios to whatever they think would be better. So yeah.
It's almost like cooking a dish, a little bit of function calling, a little bit of role playing, a little bit of, and like, so the real competitive mechanism on Subnet 6, to like take away if people want to like get into this, the data is everything, and the training method, but really the data is it. And the best methods are going to be the most general. And you have all of this like raw data coming out of 18, and you can be the chef to take the little pieces and figure out what the magic recipe is that's going to make like the best one. We just released yesterday the data set behind OpenHermes 2.5 and NousResearch 2. So like that actual data set that created what is still like probably like the most used open source model. We released the full data set for it. And if you look at some of the stats on it, you can see like this very diverse 2% of information about like historical events that occurred in this period. Like it's got a very wide like breadth of types of information. And if you were looking for some inspiration to how to actually go and get into this yourself, that would be a place that you could look as a representative sample of like some good like true world class instruction and training data set.
Beautiful.
Yep.
Okay. Well,
and we do have to head out in about 1 minute.
Yeah, I was just going to bring that
So-
up, Technium. I think that's a perfect note to end on. So thank you guys so much for coming, both of you, and for building an amazing subnet. Really fun, and much more to come. So thank you everyone for coming to the call. Round of applause for Technium and Emozilla on that, and see you soon. Ciao, everyone.
All right,
All right,
thanks.
thanks for having
Thanks for having us.